we're going to be looking at the modern historian debate about the characters of the emperors, and we're going to be focusing on the stereotypical views of the emperors and whether we can support or challenge those using ancient sources. So, typical views would view Tiberius as a tyrant, Gaius as mad, Claudius is weak and dominated by his freedmen and by his wives, and Nero as a lunatic. We're going to be having a quick look at Claudius and establishing whether he was the weak ruler who was dominated by his freedmen and his wives. And that's what a typical modern historian would focus on. And we're going to look at agreeing or disagreeing the historian using our ancient sources. One of the key things negatively leveled at Claudius is the influence of his freedmen on him. So why were freedmen increasingly used by Claudius? Well, there's a variety of different reasons. One reason could be the Senate's hostility towards Claudius and the way that he had become Roman emperor using the might of the Praetorians. And certainly after Gaius's murder, the way that Claudius was found and then taken to the Praetorian camp and then declared emperor would have created hostility. And you can see that in some of the money produced and the currency produced at that time, with Claudius and the Praetorians being celebrated. You could also talk about the Senate's ineffectiveness, and certainly that's evidence in Tiberius's reign and Tiberius's frustration with the Senate and their lack of independence. The emperors certainly needed help administering the empire, and certainly Claudius's respect for the Senate meant he couldn't ask many senators to work in a civil service. So perhaps these are some reasons why he was using freedmen rather than using the Senate, because again, he's probably trying to play that princeps, that careful balance of the princeps in showing respect for the Senate. Obviously, we also know that many of these freedmen were especially skilled in a range of areas. So Narcissus, Pallas, Callistus, and Felix are, again, probably incredibly skillful in a vast range of different areas. So there's probably lots of reasons why Claudius rather uses these freedmen. The Senate would likely feel negative about the influence of these senators. And that's why our sources, Suetonius and Tacitus, are especially critical. They're writing from a senatorial point of view, so they would really resent the level of influence that these freedmen, these ex-slaves, have with the emperor rather than the Senate. In Tacitus, we get discussions of Felix being made the governor of Judea. We get gifts given to Narcissus and Pallas. We see how influential they are, particularly in regard to Claudius's wives, and also really sort of Claudius's actions and his relationships. Tacitus also tells us that Pallas is given the insignia of a Praetorian. So lots of these examples and the influence these freedmen have would have really created a huge degree of senatorial resentment. Tacitus refers to them as slaves, and Suetonius gives you this quote that Claudius fell so deeply under the influence of these freedmen and wives that he seemed to be their servant rather than the emperor. On the wives front, what we can see is it's really wife number 3 and wife number 4 that get most coverage in our sources. So Messalina and Agrippina, and they get a lot of coverage here. Messalina is really sort of depicted as this sexually promiscuous figure. Agrippina, again, you've got the discussion of the manipulation of Claudius, the fact of this incestuous marriage, and then her promotion of Nero over Britannicus. And both of these figures have different relationships with the freedmen. Suetonius says that Claudius is so influenced by these wives and freedmen that he would public offices, army commands, all according to their wishes. He would revoke grants, edicts cancelled, letters of appointments replaced, and then crucially, 35 senators and 300 equites executed throughout Claudius's reign. But the important thing to consider with Claudius is yet again, our sources are written from a senatorial point of view, and they possibly neglect the actual efficiency and effectiveness of Claudius's administration for the vast majority of people in Rome. So we can actually a snippet of this in some information from critical sources. So Suetonius, who's actually quite critical of Claudius, actually does talk about Claudius's largesse, his generosity, gains, and the improvements for Rome, and that's corroborated and backed up by other sources as well. So you've got the actual harbour inscription of Portus and Claudius's improvements at Ostia, which really do sort of improve lives for the inhabitants of Rome, everything from grain supplies to aqueducts as well. And talking about aqueducts, you've got a contemporary who's Pliny, who discusses about how amazing Claudius's improvements are and about the improvements for the lives of the actual people. So Pliny talks about the abundant water supply as being no more remarkable achievement in the whole world. So these positive views of Claudius's administration certainly do fly in the face of some of the negativity that's leveled at Claudius, and the idea that he was a weak emperor dominated by his wives and by his freedmen.